Development of aggressive behavior in childhood and adolescence. Aggression is to a certain extent an age-normative behavior in childhood and adolescence. Young children have problems controlling emotions that give rise to aggressive behavior, such as anger, and they have yet to learn the normative constraints against acting out aggressive impulses. Typical developmental trajectories in childhood show a nonlinear pattern. Aggressive behavior is common in early childhood up until preschool age, then decreases in middle childhood, increases again in adolescence, before becoming less prevalent in adulthood. Thus, from a general developmental perspective, aggression is a transient phenomenon in the life course. However, there are children and adolescents who deviate from this normal course of development by showing high and persistent levels of aggressive behavior that are not considered age normative. In addition to the burden that high levels of aggressive behavior places on the individuals concerned and their social environment, the costs for societies are high. A study by Rivenbark et al. 2018 calculated that children with life course persistent conduct problems were disproportionately more likely to be convicted for a criminal offense and were also accounted for a disproportionate rate of emergency department visits, injury claims, and welfare benefit months in adulthood. When trying to understand the developmental dynamics of aggression, the following questions are of key importance and will guide our discussion. Lober and Hay, 1997. When does aggressive behavior first appear, and what forms does it take in childhood and adolescence? How stable are early manifestations of aggressive behavior as children get older? Does the development of aggressive behavior follow a pattern of escalation, whereby milder forms of aggression predict more severe aggressive behaviors? What are the emotional and cognitive antecedents of aggressive behavior? What is the role of the social environment in the formation and persistence of aggressive behavior patterns? Emergence and manifestations of aggression in childhood and adolescence. The first precursors of individual differences in aggression emerge very early in life. At about 3 months of age, a child is able to recognize anger in adults' facial expressions. This is followed by the expression of anger by the child in response to frustration in the second half of the first year. Young children still lack the ability to foresee the consequences of their actions and are therefore unable to intentionally inflict harm on others, as required by our definition of aggressive behavior. See Chapter 1. Nonetheless, it is possible to identify certain early affective and behavioral indicators that are predictive of individual differences in aggression later on. For example, the Cardiff Infant Conscientiousness Scale, Hay et al. 2010, was developed to address 6 aspects of the use of physical force in social interactions and the expression of anger in babies: don't want to let go of toys, pulls hair, hits out at other people, bites, has angry moods, and has temper tantrums. Reports elicited from parents and other informants when the children were between 5 and 8 months of age predicted the use of physical force against peers observed in a free play situation in the laboratory when the children were between 11 and 15 months old. In a later study, Hay et al. 2018 found that the more anger and physical force children had displayed as infants, the more likely they were to engage in violent actions within a video game when they were assessed again at the age of 7 years. Aggression in conflicts with peers and adults becomes more frequent during the second and third years of life in the form of temper tantrums and the intentional use of physical force, although overt physical aggression tends to decline after about 30 months of age, by 2.5 years. At the same time, indirect and relational forms of aggression begin to emerge, in line with children's improvement of verbal skills and understanding of social relationships. In the early school years, gender differences in aggression become apparent. Boys show higher levels of physical aggression than do girls, who are more likely to engage in indirect and relational forms of aggression. See the detailed discussion of gender differences in Chapter 4. Although the two forms of aggression were substantially correlated, a meta-analysis by Card et al. 2008 found that direct aggression was uniquely related to externalizing problems, such as attentional deficits and delinquency, whereas indirect aggression was uniquely associated with internalizing problems, such as depression and anxiety. These differential associations were confirmed in a 10-year longitudinal study of an all-male sample from adolescence to adulthood. An important change in the pattern of aggressive behavior from childhood to adolescence is that aggression and violence tend to become more socially organized, and peer groups become more important as socializing agents. Juvenile gangs assemble adolescents who share aggressive norms and mutually reinforce their aggressive behavior patterns. Gangs account for a high proportion of juvenile aggression and are attractive to highly aggressive individuals because they provide a like-minded group of peers. Although gang violence is still largely seen as a male phenomenon, groups of girl gangs engaging in serious aggression are becoming increasingly frequent. See also Chapter 10. However, there does seem to be a gender difference in that girls' aggressive behaviors are replaced by non-aggressive strategies of conflict resolution to a greater extent, whereas boys' tendencies to use aggression to resolve social conflicts more frequently persist into adolescence and early adulthood. Stability of aggressive behavior and patterns of change. An important question is whether children with aggression levels that are higher than normative for their age group remain highly aggressive in subsequent periods of development. Longitudinal studies have produced evidence that aggressive behavior is indeed relatively stable over time. Based on data from 16 studies exploring the stability of male aggressiveness, Olwus, 1979, estimated stability coefficients of R equals 0.76 over a 1-year period, R equals 0.69 over a period of 5 years, and R equals 0.60 over a 10-year period. These figures suggest that aggression is almost as stable as intelligence, even over extended periods of time. Several long-term studies have shown that aggression in childhood is linked to aggressive behavior in later life. Following a sample of boys over 5 measurements from 12 to 24 years of age, Barker et al. 2007 found 2 stable developmental trajectories. For the majority of their sample, 87%, low levels of aggression were found at each point over the 12-year period. At the same time, a highly aggressive subgroup at age 12, 13%, showed continuously high levels of aggression over time, with a peak at the age of 18 years. Boys in the high aggression trajectory performed significantly worse than did the non-aggressive group on a series of cognitive tests, indicating a link between cognitive deficits and aggression. In a Finnish study, the stability of peer nominations of aggression obtained at the ages of 8 and 14 years was R equals 0.35 for boys and R equals 0.38 for girls, and the link between peer-nominated aggression at 14 years and aggression in adulthood, a composite measure of self-reports obtained at the ages of 36 and 42 years, in the same participants was R equals 0.33 for men and R equals 0.29 for women. In a study that covered a period of 30 years, Temchev et al. 2008 found significant links between peer-nominated aggression in childhood and self-reports of aggression towards children and spouses in adulthood. The link was mediated by low educational attainment in adolescence, and the authors discussed the possibility that educational achievement may act as a protective factor to buffer the risk of aggressive children carrying their dispositions into adulthood. Further extending the study period, a 40-year longitudinal study by Huisman et al. 2009 demonstrated significant links between physical aggression in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. In their Columbia County longitudinal study, the authors obtained peer nominations of aggression at age 8 and used a combined index of self-reported severe physical aggression and aggressive personality as a measure of aggression at the ages of 19, 30, and 48 years. The correlations between the aggression measures over time for male and female participants are presented in Table 3.1. Table 3.1 not only reveals a very consistent pattern of significant correlations for both gender groups, It also shows that the stability is higher in adulthood than in the transition from childhood to age 19. For example, the correlation between aggression at age 30 and aggression at age 48 was R equals 0.56 for both men and women. Another way of looking at the issue of stability used by Huseman et al. 2009 was to identify the proportion of participants who remained consistently high, above the median, or low, below the median, in aggression over the 40 years of the study. This analysis showed that 37% of participants who were low in aggression at the age of 8 years remained low in the 3 subsequent waves, and 35% of participants who scored above the median when they were 8 years old remained in the high aggression group throughout the study. Table 3.1 Pairwise correlations of aggression over time in the Columbia County longitudinal study. Note: correlations for n equals 420 females above the diagonal, correlations for n equals 436 males below the diagonal, and all the p-values are significant. So it's basically showing how the aggression correlates over time among the same group of either females or males, and the closer the ages are in time, the higher the correlation, and as the time between the two ages increases, the correlation drops off, but is still fairly significant. Like, for example, between age 8 and age 48 for females, the correlation is 0.13. Actually, that's pretty weak. For men, it's more stable. The lowest correlation is between age 8 and age 48, which is 0.29. So that's still a lot higher. An important message that emerges from these findings is that aggression at a young age is not a problem that children can be expected to outgrow as they get older. To explain the stability of aggression in the course of development, 2 interlocking processes have been proposed, Casper et al., 1987. Through the first process, cumulative continuity, aggression is maintained because of its own consequences that accumulate over time. For example, highly aggressive children often experience academic failure, which may increase anger and hostility and thereby consolidate aggressive behavior. According to the second process, interactional continuity, aggression is maintained through the responses it elicits from others. For example, highly aggressive children are socially rejected by non-aggressive peers, which may lead them to selectively associate with other aggressive peers, creating an environment in which aggression is socially accepted. However, even though high stability coefficients were found for aggressive behavior from childhood into adolescence and early adulthood, it is important to recognize that there is also the possibility of changes in aggression over time. For example, an individual who was non-aggressive as a child may become an aggressive adolescent, i.e., show late onset of aggression. Alternatively, an aggressive child may become less aggressive over time, i.e., show a desisting pattern of aggressive behavior. There is evidence to support both patterns of change. For example, Kingston and Pryor, 1995, measured aggression in a group of Australian children on 3 occasions between the ages of 2 to 3 and 7 to 8 years, and identified 3 distinct groups. The first and largest group, comprising 55% of the boys and 41% of the girls, was the stable group that showed similar levels of aggression at the age of 2 and at the age of 8 years. The second group, consisting of 31% of the boys and 24% of the girls, showed a decrease in aggression from age 2 to 8 years. The final group consisted of children with low levels of aggression at 2 years, whose level of aggressive behavior went up from the age of 5 years. These children showed an increase in aggression. Each of the latter 2 groups displayed variability in their aggressive behavior over time, albeit in different directions. In a study following adolescents from grades 7 to 11, Martino et al., 2008, found that almost half of their sample showed an increase, 23%, or a decrease, 22%, in aggression over the 4-year period, compared with 37% whose level of aggression remained consistently low and 17% who remained consistently high. Overall, there is evidence of a continuous decline in aggression as a function of age. so desistance may reflect the age-normative pattern of development with regard to aggressive behavior. However, it is equally clear that a substantial proportion of aggressive children do not show a decline but exhibit an increase or escalation of aggressive behavior in adolescence and adulthood. Short-term escalation denotes a rapid increase in individuals who only start to become aggressive relatively late. Long-term escalation refers to a gradual increase in the severity of aggressive actions from childhood to adolescence. At a group level, evidence of long-term escalation comes from studies that have explored the cumulative onset curves for different forms of aggression varying in severity. An example of this approach is provided in Figure 3.1. It presents Lobers and Hayes' 1997 analysis of the age at which minor aggression, physical fighting, and severe violence became apparent in boys' behavior. Figure 3.1 indicates that comparatively minor forms of aggression, annoying others, bullying, showed the earliest onset, followed by physical fighting. Despite its later onset, physical fighting showed a steeper increase than minor aggression, and by the age of 15 years, the two curves reached similar prevalence levels. The latest and slowest rising onset was observed for violence, strong-arming, assault, and forced sex. As would be expected, its prevalence at age 16, although standing at almost 20%, was substantially lower than the prevalence rates for the two less violent forms of aggression. Figure 3.1. Cumulative onset of minor aggression, physical fighting, and violence in boys. Okay, so it's a dot graph similar to a bar graph with three sets of dots. On the y-axis is cumulative percentage from 0 to 60%. On the x-axis is age of onset in years from 3 to 16 years. And the three sets that they are measuring are minor aggression, physical fighting, and violence. So if you follow the dots for minor aggression, it's the highest of the three types when the child is 4 years to 15 years old, and only converges with physical fighting by 16. So by about 15, it can be up to like 40% cumulative percentage. Okay, so if you follow physical fighting, that is quite low. When the child is quite young, it starts to increase around 10 to 12. And then by 16, it is about 40% cumulative percentage, so it matches minor aggression. And then if you follow violence, violence stays quite low. It starts to increase about 11 and doesn't increase as much as physical fighting. And by the age of 16, it's at about 20%, so half the cumulative percentage of the other two forms, minor aggression and physical fighting. Okay, so violence stays the lowest. Minor aggression starts earlier, and it coincides with physical fighting by age 16, and its incidence rate is kind of between minor aggression and violence until the age of 16, when it's as high as minor aggression, which are the most common types. In addition to describing different patterns of development, it is crucial to identify their correlates at the level of the person and the social environment. Moffat's 1993 work on the distinction between adolescence limited and life course persistent, aggressive and antisocial behavior exemplifies this approach. Moffat argues that life course persistent antisocial behavior is associated with specific risk factors and manifestations that distinguish this developmental pattern from adolescence limited antisocial behavior. Table 3.2 summarizes some of the differences between the two developmental trajectories. Table 3.2, two prototypes of antisocial behavior over the life course. So adolescence limited antisocial behavior versus life course persistent antisocial behavior. For adolescence limited antisocial behavior, emerges in puberty as a virtually normative pattern of behavior. Psychological discomfort during the maturity gap, desire for autonomy, desistance from antisocial behavior when adopting adult roles, social mimicry of antisocial models, associated with non-violent delinquent offenses in adulthood. Life course persistent antisocial behavior originates in early childhood, Early neurodevelopmental risk factors, cognitive deficits, difficult temperament, hyperactivity, exacerbated by high-risk social environment, inadequate parenting, family conflict, rejection by peers, associated with violent crime in adulthood. The life course persistent antisocial behavior pattern is assumed to start in early childhood, originating from a combination of neuropsychological deficits and adverse social conditions. Individuals with a life course persistent pattern of antisocial behavior typically show early cognitive and affective deficits and are often born into a high-risk family environment. As noted by Moffat, 2007, over the first 2 decades of development, transactions between the individual and the environment gradually construct a disordered personality with hallmark features of physical aggression and antisocial behavior persisting to midlife. By contrast, individuals with an adolescence-limited pattern typically do not show developmental abnormalities in early childhood and come from normal family backgrounds. They are described as otherwise ordinary healthy youngsters who take up aggressive and antisocial behavior in adolescence out of discomfort about experiencing a maturity gap, i.e., the feeling that their biological maturation is not matched by social maturation because they are denied access to adult role behavior and entitlement. Engaging in aggressive and antisocial behavior to demonstrate autonomy in relation to parents and hasten social maturation is seen by these adolescents as a normative pattern of behavior, which is given up once they grow into adult social roles. Rather than being driven by neuropsychological deficits and adverse family conditions, adolescents' limited aggression results from social mimicry, i.e., the imitation of and attraction to antisocial peers.